was the challenge that we faced in terms of preparing the proposal and how to balance the different interests. Of course, we wanted as much transparency as possible, but of course, we were very much conscious, very regularly reminded of the burden that there could be for companies in this process. The state of the European economy means that this is also preoccupation which is very high in the minds of politicians at the moment too. So we try to strike this balance by having materiality criteria. Of course, you're going to ask me later on what exactly is that going to mean in practice. We haven't said a lot around materiality in the proposal. There are some ideas in the impact assessment, but I think that's something very much that now needs to be debated now that the proposal is on the table. But that materiality criteria is in relation to the recipient government, not to do with the company making the payment.
So what do we do in the countries for which we have the greatest concern, which was the whole origin of this work in the first place? And the answer is we have no other source of this transparency other than mandatory mechanisms. And that's why we fully support what's happened through the Dodd-Frank provision in the United States and what's coming out of Europe now. And we would encourage the Parliament here to take this provision coming out of the Commission and work with it, because I think we're actually on the verge of potentially creating a global standard. We've seen, for example, the Hong Kong Exchange require disclosure on a country-by-country basis for new listers, and they've intimated to us that they would return and revisit for existing listers and amend and expand the coverage of that legislation should Europe and should the United States progress as they've been indicating. In addition, we've had similar messages from the Shanghai Exchange. So I think we're on the cusp of creating something here that could make a massive difference for a very relatively low cost for people in these countries, and it's vitally needed and it's urgent.
Now, I'm happy that it's not only the European Parliament, but also the European Commission that is moving forward with legislation here. However, my praise for the proposal is not completely unqualified, because on one hand, it goes beyond Carden-Luger by, for instance, including forestry and some major non-listed companies. Some of my colleagues feel that it could have included agriculture, maybe. On the other hand, I think we should own up to the fact that it falls behind Carden-Luger when it proposes to make exemptions for the theoretical case that there would be national legislation considering such disclosure as criminal acts. I haven't studied that in detail myself, but I know that there is a study that has been published by people from Columbia University that have argued so far there is not a single case of such legislation that could be named. And of course, you start asking yourself, well, if that be the case, and maybe someone knows better and gives examples, but if that be the case really, why would we then go in that direction? And so
we are global, but until recently we were largely concentrated in OECD countries, and in particular in Australia, which is still the source of some 70–80% of our revenues, above all from iron ore right now. But we are around the world and currently expanding in Mozambique, in Guinea, in Mongolia. Those are very big projects. We're also in South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, Peru, Chile, Brazil, and so on. So these are countries around the world where we have worked, in particular with EITI, to build the capacity of the local government and supply them with the data that under EITI they require. But we're also delighted that now Australia and the US have said that they will sign up and pilot EITI, because we see it as being a standard or an initiative which should cover the developed countries just as it covers the developing, because the issues of accountability should be the same.
And then lastly, people have mentioned this question as well of project. How exactly do we define the project? Again, that was a difficult one to strike the balance. The current text leaves quite a lot of flexibility, I would say, to companies about what they call a project. It may be that we need to go a bit further than that in terms of how we look at it. But the challenge was, for example, somewhere like Canada, if we're talking about logging on the forestry side of things, and then we talk about the lease or concession, then what would happen is that there would have to be thousands of disclosures, which won't necessarily make it that meaningful in terms of people who are looking at the information either.
I actually think the whole issue of criminality for people on the ground is a misnomer, because we're talking about the parent company, not the subsidiary. And usually it's a subsidiary, unless anyone has any exemptions to that. Maybe there are a few that I haven't thought of, but mostly it's the subsidiary, a subsidiary company. So if the parent company is doing the disclosing, why is that of any relevance from a criminality point of view to a subsidiary operating in the country? It's a complete misnomer.
I'd like to think that we don't hide behind the API. I think Shell does have a track record of standing up and speaking for itself. I was going to say that I think tonight was a timely event, but I think actually I was wrong. I think we should have been doing this 2 or 3 years ago, and I think if I look in the mirror, I think industry didn't do itself a service, and I think we refrained from discussions like this before Dodd-Frank, and what we're now seeing is actually the discussion and the debate which should have happened beforehand. So I think we have to look ourselves in the mirror on that.